Welcome back, everyone. Sorry about the hiccups. We are going to work on that for next time. One other thing that I realized is not on the agenda and typically is approval of the minutes from the previous meeting. And so perhaps we could just approve both sets of minutes next time. I realized Ms. Rath, when we were talking about the agenda, I didn't even name that one, but I think we should. And Ms. Lee, I see you're on the call. So if we could just plan to approve both sets of minutes next month.
That would be fantastic. Thank you.
All right. So in terms of our agenda today, we're going to take a look at our budgets to actual so far this year. We're going to get a little bit more in depth on the supervised learning labs and the financial implications of that. Mr. Lewis, thank you for joining us on that one. And then we're going to talk about the equity audit, which was one of the items in the board articulation of what we're going to be doing towards policy 1030 equity in education this year. So I believe we were imagining something like the longest topic probably being the supervised learning labs. I won't commit too much to specific times for each of these, but we'll just see where we get. But that's the plan for today. And so, Ms. Rath, maybe I will pass it over to you to take us into the budgets and actuals.
That sounds great. Would you mind, whoever can make me host, if that could happen, so I may share my screen?
I can do that for you. Give me just a second.
Thank you.
You're now presenting.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I appreciate everyone who is in attendance for this budget committee meeting, the second one of this year on today, October the 21st. We're going to talk about today is we're going to take a look at the budget that was approved by the board on September the 14th. If you recall, we looked at the budget at this level, and a budget was approved for our operating budget of $95.1 million. We're going to now start looking at this budget and how our actual expenditures for the first quarter, which would be through September the 30th, are tracking in regards to this budget. Now, do keep in mind that this budget is in total, and so we will be looking at where we are against a total budget. Here is a comparison in the categories that we had previously shared with you. The only change here is the operations budget, and I had broken out some more details as I will show you on the following screen. So operation is, the number is different there, but as you can see, our budget is tracking about 22% of our total budget. We would anticipate that in theory, we should be approximately at 25%. Since the largest portion of our expenditures and our budget is associated with personnel, because we do have vacancies, we are going to be off of that 25% as a result of that. But typically, if we were fully staffed, we should be at 25% of our budget in our personnel category for sure. Typically, spending in the first quarter is not typically in a real world a normal pre-COVID world would be about 25% of expenditures, or we would anticipate more because we would have been ordering and getting ready for the open of schools in August, which, as we well know, in this COVID world has not occurred and will not occur until January.
Ms. Rath, can I just ask a technical question about how this works? So the 10-month employees, are they still paid over the summer, or are they only paid in the 10 months? Like, because those other 2 months are over the summer, right?
They do have the option to be paid over 12 months. Yes, they can. And when I look at that, I take into those account those salaries that are escrowed in regards to that.
Okay, that's what I was wondering in terms of the 25% spending.
That's a great question. Good question. So here are the actual numbers categories, looking at how we are spending with a total here of 22%. As you can see, there are a couple of areas that we are over, and we would anticipate that. We do know that technology, with all of the additional spending that we have had to do in this first quarter as a result of COVID and preparing our students, you can see that spending is up, as well as the operations spending is up. A lot of, also, let me state this, a lot of the operations first quarter increase is a result of a lot of those expenditures that we have to pay July 1, like, for example, our boiler insurances, all of our insurances, property, workers' compensation, all of those are paid in July. So those actual costs are going to be higher for that first quarter than the 25%.
So, Rhonda, when you do prepare the budget, do you prepare it by quarter so that you anticipate these expenses coming into the first quarter? Because I find it, and you and I have gone back and forth on email on this, I find it very difficult to look at a budget, a quarter actuals against an annual budget without understanding how the budget projects out for the year, for exactly the reason you're saying.
Yes.
So how do you prepare the budget by quarter?
The budget is prepared in total. When we look at our budgets and compile our budgets and our state budgets and from the various resources that we receive our funds, it is all in total, an annual total amount.
That's the funding side. The expense side also you look at in total?
No, not necessarily. I actually track expenses and look at them on a monthly basis to just see how, they are trending and tracking. And when I look at a 4-year trend of these actual expenditures, we're tracking pretty much right in line with where we typically are for this first quarter.
Okay.
I have a brief question, Ms. Rath. If I'm hard to hear, I'm going to turn off my video when I ask a question, so just let me know. But
I hear you fine.
Thank you. Ms. Rath, did you insurance, would that be under operations? Boiler type insurance, is that like a consumable in operation, or where would that fall?
That's where it would fall, is in that category. That is correct.
Thank you.
There had been some conversations and some questions about seeing the breakdown of the categories that we had presented on the 14th, of maybe being able to see the personnel piece of that in regards to the other components of the budget. And I also, after some conversations, pulled out the administrative personnel and broke that out into a separate category as well.
Yeah, this is really helpful, in particular because, for most or almost any organization, their personnel is such a huge piece of the budget. So seeing all the places we have personnel and that pulled out separately is really helpful. So thanks for doing that.
Yeah,
Sure.
as I look at this, I think, something else that we'll definitely do or that I'll make note of going forward is maybe, from here, take and let you see what that total personnel is with all of them together. You have them here and we can add them, but, for presentation and ease of understanding going forward, I will add information where you can see how they look in regards to a total.
Would you mind defining the categories, like what's in school administrator versus administrative personnel versus instruction?
Yes. Thank you. I'm sorry, Ms. Hauser. Absolutely. I was taken for granted. So I appreciate you pointing that out. School administrator is comprised of your principals and your assistant principals at all of our school locations. The administrative personnel is going to be that is going to be your cabinet, your superintendent, and your directors. And your assistant directors will be comprised in that administrative personnel category.
So,
I'm sorry. Nope. Go right ahead. Ask your question.
Where's all the IT guys? I guess the IT guys, where's all your finance people? Where's all the staff people that work for the cabinet?
Okay, so that's in these categories. I guess that is where it can be a little confusing or tricky. In technology, you see the personnel line there. That represents all personnel that are associated with technology. That would include directors, cabinet members, all of your techs. In operations, the personnel there, if you recall, operations was made up of maintenance, human resources, finance, policy leadership, and public relations. So those personnel would be accounted for there along with the maintenance techs and all of the office staff, all of the finance staff, the HR staff, all of those that are attributable to operations would be included in that category.
Got it. So that's because we usually, when we talk about operations, we talk about building maintenance. So operations here is essentially all the districts, most of the district staff is in operations.
That would,
all the functional staff.
the function staff, I think, would be a yes.
Okay, that's helpful. And the charter reimbursement, that's just math, right? I mean, we don't control that at all. We get the money, we spend it.
That is correct. We are just a flow through. We do bill and pay that when it's on a 10-month schedule. So 10% is we are right on target for that. And the charter school enrollment for those students in Orange County schools that are in charter schools, the first month of enrollment that we have received is right in line with where we ended last year.
Okay.
Which
and
is,
I have one more.
Yes.
Okay, one more question. Transportation, I guess I'm a little confused because I thought that's a separate fund. Transportation.
Actually, we receive funding for transportation from state resources. There's also some from federal, and there is funding from local that funds transportation. It is a separate, getting down into the accounting of it, it is a separate PRC that our transportation flows to, but we actually have budget for transportation in state, federal, and local.
Okay, but we can't, when I look at this from a, if you will, a financial management perspective, management, the district as well as the board, wants to know where we're spending under, where we're spending over, and how we might move money if there's a need. And so the question for transportation, is that money movable, or does it have to stay on transportation? Because if it does, go ahead.
That's a great question. Yes, it is movable within certain parameters. For example, we have utilized some of our bus drivers as well as our safety assistants in other capacities in the district. As a result
Okay,
of
so
our
there's movable.
buses, it is movable. We will make within the allowances that we are allowed, we can shift those funds from state, for example, transportation to state operations, where we can shift some of that funding. And keep in mind, we have total autonomy on our local side. So any of our funds, which I will talk about more when I get into a few of the other slides deeper in, when we start looking at our actual underruns that are available for expending right now, those are primarily going to be in your local funds where we have a lot of autonomy.
Okay, I mean, the question that the committee probably should look at, and we might not want to do it today, is categories. And are these the right categories, or do we want to categorize them differently to help us to give more visibility to the things we need to understand better? So I'll leave it there. Some things come up to me, but I'll leave it there.
Okay, yeah, definitely. If these categories, when I began this process and presented the budget approval, I looked at the categories where our highest expenditures were, and basically a budget based upon categorizing it in that manner, as well as a lot of the initiatives that we may have going on. And if we need to change those, and if it's something that changes frequently, we will make that change, because the intent is to be able to provide you guys the information that you need to make the most responsible decisions and provide us the most responsible direction forward in regards to expending budget. And it's definitely available. And, depending upon, do you want to see it at a high level or a granular level? We can definitely make that available and break it out by fund so that we can see those by each of the funding sources.
Okay. Great.
All right. So from there, where I would like to carry the conversation next is to take a look at where we are underrunning in this first quarter. And as we're at about 22%, and actually identifying areas that I am comfortable to state that these budgets would be available for expending now. When I start the year and look at the budget and we're looking at it in total, we approach each year that we're going to, because of the nature of our business and zero-based budget, basically our revenues always are zeroed out with our expenditures. The lens that I'm looking at everything from at the beginning of the year is that we're going to spend what we have received from all of our resources. However, we do know that there are things that occur throughout the year which can lead to us having underruns in certain areas. And one area in particular is any of our vacancies where we may have salaries that have been budgeted for the full fiscal year, which when we have vacancies, of course, those salaries are elapsing and accumulating because they're in the budget. However, they're not being expended because we don't have an individual in those positions. So when I look at the lapsed salaries for July through September, and that's looking at each individual vacancy that we have in the district and looking at that vacancy as to whether it's a 10-month position or a 12-month position, and factoring in the benefits that are budgeted and associated with each of those positions based upon the vacancies that we have in the district right now. We have approximately $248,000 in lapsed salary that are in budget but are not being expended because there are no one in those positions. Middle school, is there a question before I move on?
I was just going to ask a question about that one, which is, yeah, I know the positions are funded from different sources, and some of them you just can't spend on anything but a teaching position, for example. So is this sort of available local money where it's flexible to potentially be spent on something else, or is this?
Yes, ma'am. That's
Okay.
a great question, and thank you for asking that. You are right. So what we will do is we will move local expenses to state, as we've talked about before, to make sure that we will move from local to state funding, because we won't let that state fund revert. I can only use it on classroom teachers, but we do have teachers who are funded locally. So as we, those typically don't occur until closer to the end of the fiscal year. But what we will basically do is begin moving local funded teaching positions to state funding teaching positions so that we do not let those funds revert. Is that helpful?
It is. I think it's I guess a general question for all of these as we're looking through them and you're going through them, which is, so all of these are in the sort of, this is local money and we could flexibly spend it. However,
Yes.
none of these are restricted to a certain expenditure.
That is correct, Ms. Smiley.
Okay.
We, on the back side, on the accounting side, will make all the transfers to sure that those other resources are utilized. So that basically means that it frees up more local funds where we have more flexibility and autonomy to spend.
That's great.
So,
Thank you.
so Rhonda, put in a different way, you always spend the state and federal money first. So any money that's left over. Right.
That is correct. Yeah.
That's how you do it.
Yes, ma'am.
Where do subs come in? I mean, do we have a budget in this quarter for subs? And I would think we're not running under on subs and maybe supplies.
Yes. Subs, yes. Budget for subs. I was not comfortable because that's a great question, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. I didn't categorize subs here because not knowing what our anticipation or expectation is going to be when we open, I was afraid, I'm not very comfortable pulling those sub budgets just yet until I have a baseline or a feel of what that true spending is going to look like when we do open in January. Not knowing the number of subs that may be required depending upon our options that are approved and chosen by our students, I wasn't comfortable totally pulling from that budget at this point. Our local budget is roughly $300,000 for subs.
quarter or for a year? Is that for a quarter or a year?
That is for a year. That is an annual
Okay.
number. That we do have funding in various resources that there's state funds, federal funds, as well as local funds. And of course, we're going to use your state and federal first, but that's that's mainly what's available in our substitute cost.
Got it.
Middle school after school staffing, middle school after school and our there's no charge to families when they opt to have students attend middle school after school. And middle school after school is traditionally staffed by middle school teachers. As a result, and it's totally funded from our local budget. There are no other funding resources for that since we do not charge families for that service. So because schools have not been open for this first semester and will not be opening until January, we have half of the middle school after school budget right now that is in our local budget that is not going to be expended. That could be, you know, it could be utilized if, you know, however the board sees fit, whether that be ramping up the program when we open in January, or if those funds need to be moved and utilized in another capacity.
So you're saying it's 130,000? And by
That's
the
what
end of
our,
the year, it'll be 130, so we'll have another 65,000.
that is correct.
Okay.
Ms. Wright,
Stand up. Yes, I'm sorry.
I had two questions. So I had a question about the salaries and understanding what you've talked about before with, using the state funds first. So what does it look like on the teacher's contract with local money, and then it gets contracts look like, or is it purely just an accounting?
I'm sorry, Miss Doyle, you were breaking up on me, but so if I may repeat what your question was, and please correct me. In regards to a teacher's contract, the teacher's contract, they will be paid what they're contracted to be paid. It's an accounting entry and tracking as to whether they are funded from state resources or local resources. Was that your question?
Yes, that was. Okay. And then another question I had, thank you. I was surprised to see here that the middle school after school is an expense, because why am I thinking that our after school program is part of our enterprise funds? Is that for younger grades, or how does that work?
And we charge a fee. We do not charge a fee for middle school after school. That is available at free of charge. So the district, I apologize, I don't know the full context of how that came to be, but at some point the district made the decision that they wanted to provide middle school after school for families and that they would not charge families for that. So as a result of it being free, it has to be budgeted in our local budget for us to be able to offer that to them for free.
Okay,
Does that make sense? If we were charging for, be tracking that in that enterprise fund because it would be based upon a fee. Okay, if there's no other questions, we'll continue on here. Our elementary school resource officers are funded via a grant where it's a matching grant where we get state funds, but we have to match it with local funds. So with schools being closed and not having those elementary school resource officers in our buildings, when I look at the trend of what it typically has cost us, we're only billed for these annually at the end of the year. The actual county will provide a bill to Orange County Schools for those elementary school resource officers. And based upon looking at the trend of those bills and looking at those on a monthly to quarterly basis, it's roughly $85,000 that's in our local budget, which is our matching portion of this, that is not being expended at this time. Our middle and high school resource officers are funded totally by county commissioners. When I look at our utilities and how our trend is for this first quarter in comparison to previous quarters when we had full capacity in our buildings, we are trending down approximately $85,000 at this time. In district travel, of course, is also down because we don't have bookkeepers in the schools. We don't have staff in the schools who are traveling for workshops, conferences, etc. So that is those anticipated savings there. And then the final item, as you recall, our board made the decision 3 years ago to offer universal breakfast to our elementary school students free of charge as a result of the summer feeding program that we are under and that has been approved for us to continue under for the rest of this fiscal year. It is not costing us anything to provide those breakfasts. So the total budget for that for the year is $95,000 that is totally in our local budget and funded in our local budget. So up to the time that we anticipate schools opening back up, of course, I have projected that half of that is available right now. It would be anticipated that the full $95,000 should be available because of the summer feeding program being extended through the end of the current academic year, which would be June of 2021.
I just have one thought on the utilities piece, which is I wonder if, and I don't know enough about how these things work, but if we are, when we go back into buildings in a much fuller sense, if we are running more units, if we're running HEPA filters, if we're running our HVAC systems for longer or increasing filtration and that puts more strain on the system or something like this, I wonder if our utilities costs may go up a little bit. And I don't know by how much or if there's a way to estimate that, but that does seem like not really similar to subs in that, like if we're making adjustments for building ventilation purposes, we might see some increase in utilities.
That's a good
I have
question.
no idea how to estimate. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a good question, Ms. Smiley. And I wonder also, without a baseline, how to estimate or anticipate that. But it is definitely something that we will watch, especially with our first group of students returning on Monday, October the 26th. Even though the group is smaller, we would still anticipate that we would be increasing that filtration and running those units even at the level I would hope, and this is way out of my expertise here, but it's definitely something that, you know, we will look and see how we're trending and see if that is going to be an impact.
Great. Yeah. And there might be other things here too. I mean, I was just thinking of the HVACs because, you know, how much I'm thinking about the HVACs, but, you know, even all the students having their computers on and charging in the building more, some of these things. Yeah, I just wonder what that would do to, whether that would have an impact on like electricity bills or any of it. So.
Yeah, I hear you, and that's something that we definitely will keep an eye on and track just to see, to try to get to determine a baseline to see what that impact is.
Awesome.
Yeah, just there'll be offsets, right? Like the new HVAC at Cameron Park or the partial and, right, so there's offsetting costs. Do we pay for water?
We do. We do.
Okay. Do you know how the bill splits out? How much?
I can get
I'm
that
just
for you, Ms.
curious.
Hauser. Yeah, I
Okay.
don't know that off the top of my head. And water, anybody, the water bills seem, they're astonishing as to the cost of the water for our schools. And, you know, that's just my inexperience with water bills. I'm used to my well. So,
Yeah, me
but,
too, me too.
you know, we're continuing, you know, education is continuing on the athletic fields. You know, there are, I'm sure the water is not at the level that it is when the buildings are at capacity. And, you know, I do think getting a baseline in each of those areas will be something that we will look at going forward in regards to not only electricity, but our telephone as well as our water.
And except you're saying utilities, we're going to use a little bit now, but roughly, are we going to see double this for the next quarter? Is that as long as our schools are remaining closed? This pretty, you know, the resources.
This should carry an estimate for through the first semester, which would, other than salaries, of course, I'm only looking at salaries in that time period because our goal is to fill those vacancies as soon as possible.
Right.
So, you know, but the rest of these categories are based upon not opening fully until January at the end of the first semester.
Okay. Great, thank you.
Yes, thank you for the great questions.
Anna, Rhonda, on the utilities, one thing, do you know off the top of your head what the total utilities budget might be for this time? Like, is this saving, do we think we underran by like 10% or 5%? Because that might give us just even a ballpark of like, do we think that we might spend 5 or 10% higher in the spring because everybody's going to be washing their hands all the time, you know?
Great question. When I look at the trends, we're about 6% under, based upon trends of previous years. Our total utility budget, I am apologizing.
You don't need to apologize.
I want to, it's around probably 2 million for all utilities annually.
Yeah. So we're a little bit under, 6% or so you said. So we might be a little bit over in the second half of the year if everybody's washing their hands all the time and we're running the HVACs a little bit more and we're, you know, each of those things doing a little bit more. This feels to me a little bit less like, I mean, we have $85,000 in fund balance if we're running, but you know, it seems like a place where we might spend up a little bit.
I'm wondering if it won't be that bad because your point, Ms. Smiley, with laptops, I mean, for the older kids, they're already doing laptops in school pretty much round the clock and we'd be at half capacity or less. So I don't see how that would be
That's a good point.
more than a typical year. And, you know, even with water bills, you know, if we have a third to half the students, they can all wash their hands 2 or 3 more times a day, you know. I don't know, maybe it won't turn out to be that bad, except for like what you're saying with, you know, if we're making efforts to improve ventilation and air purifiers, I would see things like that going up. But in terms of the student use, it seems like it wouldn't be up because we wouldn't be past half capacity.
That's a great point. Yeah.
If I just have to do this, and I just have to get a little snarky here, but this district spent a small fortune of money on a geothermal HVAC system for Orange High School. And based on some perceived environmental values and savings, and I don't really want the answer, but I just need to say, was it worth it? Because we may be asked to be making decisions like that in the future. And I just really have trouble with, we could have put HVAC systems in 3 schools for what we spent for that. And so I'll just leave it.
Yeah. I mean, I do think I know that system isn't up and running yet, you know, but I do remember the board had, I think this is before my time on the board because I'm remembering it from like sitting in an auditorium watching it, but I think they had a presentation on like the break even point. And yeah, I mean, I think that information exists about what the time horizon is for, you know, estimated savings and stuff. So.
Okay. All right. And there's a question about it. Yeah, we don't have to answer it. I just need to comment that we'll be watching it. We'll be watching it and we'll ask harder questions, I think, in the future.
All right. Thank you. So now let's shift into, we talked about what we know at this point in time as our anticipated savings that we have realized in this first quarter. Now let's talking about some of the expenditures that are coming to light that were not included in our budget. And then we're going to move into next talking about those that we may not have a cost for at this point, but that to give you an idea and to make it known of what is going to be coming. There has been some discussion from our operations team. We were unable to get to it fully at our last board meeting, but there was a proposal to add water bottle fillers at all of our schools and all of our buildings. When we have looked at that, it is part of the deferred maintenance budget. What has been occurring as old water fountains have had to be replaced, they have actually been being replaced with water bottle fillers at those schools. And so those funds we feel like are available in our deferred maintenance budget versus having to use our local budget to fund those and to actually put those in all of our locations. We know they're cleaner and they're more sanitary, and we have already been making the decision that as we are having to replace any of those units in our schools and our buildings, they are being replaced with the more sanitary water bottle fillers. At our last board meeting, there was a lot of discussion in regards to ventilation, and the board made the proposal and approved a fund balance appropriation at that time for the purchase of 3 air purifiers for each of our school locations, with the intent that those would be for the isolation sick rooms, the nurses' offices, and then there would be 1 purifier that would be available immediately for those potential separate settings, EC classrooms where students may not be able to mask or have trouble keeping on mask for the full school day. So that was approved and is in the process of being ordered now. The supervised learning labs was also discussed at the previous board meeting, and the board wanted to offer that for our staff for free, so that as staff are having to come back into the buildings and teach students, they wanted to make availability for any of the staff who have childcare needs, that they would have those available to them free of charge. The cost that is presented here, and we're going to go into more detail on that when we get into our supervised learning lab portion of this meeting, but the cost here is based upon the responses that we have received from staff who need child care or who would need the supervised learning lab setting for when they return to the classroom. That this is also based upon offering this free for the staff through June of 2021. If there's not any questions, I
have a couple. So the water bottle fillers, when they come, that's got coming out of the deferred maintenance, is that the capital budget or is that this operating budget? And
it's capital. It's capital.
Okay.
As you will see, the 84 there in total does not include those water bottle fillers. That just represents the 184 just
Got it.
represents what we know is going to come out of our local operating budget.
Got it. And then I have my big question is, when does it come out of well, let me ask two, where does like the $400,000 for Edmentum come out of? And when does something come out of the fund balance versus a budget surplus? That's like my $50,000 question, if you will.
That is a great question. Edmentum, when we started the year out, when you're looking at when I look at beginning of the year budget, as I kind of talked about previously, I look at, we're going to spend totally what we've asked for and been funded. So before the school year started with Edmentum, at that time, we did not know when we would be opening schools back up. We did not know how much of our budget would be available as a result. So that is why fund balance was recommended to be appropriated for that purchase, because had we not utilized fund balance, we would have had to actually looked at cutting budgets in our other areas. In regards to the purifiers, that theoretically, I guess in all transparencies, Ms. Hauser, could be utilized from expense underruns. What will occur is fund balance was appropriated for this, but at the end of the year, if our local expenditures underrun our budget, that fund balance will be put back into fund balance, if that makes sense.
I understand what you're saying. I think there's a different way to do this. We can talk about it offline.
Sure.
But I think, I personally would prefer more transparency that says, here's what's the budget for the first quarter. Here's what we were under. Here's what we were over. Like even I'll give the Project Jumpstart. Where was that? Where did those funds come from? Was that budgeted or was that funded through a budget surplus?
Project Jumpstart, you're referring to the program,
Right.
correct? That's fully funded from the state, and that's those are full total state funds.
So that was budgeted. Okay.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, I know I'd like more transparency around the puts and takes. I don't need every detail. I don't need, $10,000 expenses, but I think it's helpful. But I think there's some really good things that we're spending money on that it would be really nice to get some transparency around.
Sure.
And anyway, so I think there's some other ways to do it that brings things out into the open. and helps us anticipate what's coming down the road. But we don't have to get into it now.
Do you want to say just maybe a word or two more about that now, Ms. Hauser? Because I think, from my perspective, it feels like it has been pretty transparent where the money for Enrollment has come from and Project Jumpstart. And, I think it would be helpful to hear a little bit more about that.
Well, if I go back to, so we have first quarter actuals of about $21 million. But I think our first quarter actuals are probably closer to $22 million. And so I would like to know, and then there's a little bit of, so for example, so I would like to know where we're running under, what are the line items? And I hear that Project Jumpstart is not one of them, but Edmentum is not, somehow isn't shown here at all. So we're not giving visibility to having spent $400,000 in Edmentum because it was budgeted, because Rhonda managed it out of the fund balance, but in fact it was not a budgeted expense. It should be showing here, and then we should be showing everything that we approved a budget. We should be showing everything that we spent that wasn't in the budget, and everything that we saved that was in the budget, just, in basic categories.
Yeah, but I think in our last board meeting, there was a presentation of all of those, how we've allocated fund. I think I remember seeing all of that about how we had spent funds.
Maybe you can keep track of it. I can't keep track of all the, I would like to see a kind of a standard way that we do it all the time. And if there's numbers that we agree to, I'd like to keep, doesn't mean that it got into the budget. It's always a number that wasn't, I just would like to have the numbers consistently presented, because there's certain things that you want to kind of keep running track of. I think that's how I'm used to working.
Maybe I should clarify, Ms. Hauser, and you bring up, I hear both of you, and I appreciate your dialogue into what you're understanding and what you would like to understand better. From my lens, the chart that you're looking at right now are known expenditures that we know of right now that we have not already gotten approval from the board to spend. Those ones that you're referring to, I guess in my world, I hear what you're saying. We need to keep a running track of all of those unbudgeted expenditures for this fiscal year. I guess in my mind, the board approved it. It's been spent. That is now an actual expenditure because it has been approved and spent.
Right, but when I look at the budget for next year, or I look at the trending, I've lost visibility to what was budgeted. Is my budget off, or is my spending off, or, right? Because if I'm trending it and I lose visibility of that, then I lose visibility of the trends. That's what I'm looking for.
Okay, because when I look at it, I look at trends, I factor out fund balance appropriations and fund balance purchases because they should be one-time purchases and not recurring. So when I look at trends, I factor those out.
Okay.
So, I agree with that, and I like your point about just tracking the non-budgeted appropriations throughout the year, and it seems like we'd be able to look at those 10 or 20 items and see, like you're saying, well, this is a one-off. Air purifiers hopefully will be a one-time. Hopefully we don't need to buy $50,000 to $500,000 worth of air purifiers next year as well. So we'll be able to see if we need to adjust categories for the coming budget, or if it was simply the one-off type incidences.
Yeah, and we'll do that. I will begin preparing to share with the board and to share with this committee all of those unbudgeted expenditures, and maybe we can look at them as to where they're funded from. Whether that's going to be fund balance or whether expense underruns. If you feel like that would be helpful and something that you would like to see, we will definitely do that.
If we're running under budget, you talked earlier about subs and you say we're running under budget for first quarter, but you think that there may be we may run higher later in the year. So you would, from a budget perspective, you're saying I'd cut it for the first quarter, but I might increase the budget for later quarters. That's kind of what you were saying. And that to me is different. So I guess if I'm running under budget, I'm going to be a little bit freer with how I might look at an expense versus than if I'm running over budget. So from a management perspective, by not understanding run rates and by not understanding where we are on spending, it's harder for us to say, hey, do we have the money or not? And so structurally, you're going into the fund balance. Am I hearing this correctly? You go into the fund balance if it's a one-time expense, and you go into the operating budget if it's a recurring expense. Is that how you're doing it?
No, ma'am, not exactly.
Okay.
We should only utilize fund balance when we don't have budget and when it is a non-recurring one-time expenditure. It would not be prudent or wise for us to, for example, add a position that we don't have a budget source for other than fund balance, because we would be depleting, we would be inaccurately assuming that we were going to be having fund balance every year, where in theory, from my perspective, taxpayer dollars, we're not trying to build savings. We're actually trying to meet the needs of our community.
Exactly. So
that's that's kind of my perspective of there are times where we may have to utilize fund balance for a recurring expenditure, but it would be only for that fiscal year. We would revisit in the next budget cycle in our approach to commissioners, where that would become part of our continuation budget. And then if we're not funded based upon fund balance that is available and based upon the initiative and direction of the district, we would make the decision at that time. The goal would be that positions or anything that is recurring would not stay in fund balance. They would be actually shifted to our operating budget, and we would either make cuts somewhere else, or if we had fund balance, make the decision at that time to utilize it, but it would only be in a specific period of time. I hope that's helpful and not more confusing.
it's a little confusing, I guess. I'm looking for, let me be really simple. I'm looking for trend on budget versus trend on fund balance, because they're different. And if I can't see the trends on the budget, I don't know if I'm running under or over on recurring expenses. So let me put it in that way. So, and if I'm running under on recurring expenses, and we need to, let's say we have investments that we have to make in order to close our gaps, right? In order to improve our academics, where will that money come from? We have to be able to, and we may have to go to the fund balance for it, who knows, but we can't tell how we're running against budget, how we're running against fund balance, how we're running on all these things. And it's not a quarterly issue. We have to really be able to look out to the end of the year and how's the year going to end. And right now we're running in the other thing that, and I can't figure out how to, I can't tell from these numbers, but not only are we $500,000 ahead for this quarter, and I think over $1 million or $1.5 million ahead from the prior quarter in the fund balance, but then we have funds that have come out, additional funds that we paid for Admentum and other things, and I'm not sure where they're showing. So it's just, I can't tell what's happening with our books. I can't tell how they're trending out because of the way the transactions are presented to me.
So maybe it's a matter of, as we look at the budget and what's happening with that as well, also looking at the fund balance and the trend of that at the same time. So we can, look at both of those simultaneously. I did find it really helpful, the $500,000 that you've identified on that previous slide of where we have money available in the budget, we have like underruns available to be spent. I found that very helpful versus there might be places where we're underrunning, but actually it's not available to be spent. And so this is like being able to hone in on how much are we actually talking about that we may have available, that I did find really helpful.
Thank you, Ms. Smiley. Appreciate all of the feedback, and these meetings are for you, and the intent is to be totally transparent, and if that means we need to change the way that we're providing the information, we will do that.
Appreciate that.
Just comment, and Sarah, there's to me, I'm used to seeing like first quarter budget versus first quarter actuals, and then year-to-date budget versus year-to-date actuals, because I need to compare the actuals against the same budget period because spending doesn't go evenly through the year. And then I want to see an estimate to complete for the remainder of the year. So if subs, for example, we underspent on subs, but we anticipate spending more on subs later in the year, you'd want to see a kind of revised budget to show that.
Yeah.
You want to see not only how much have we spent, but are we in trouble for the rest of the year? Do we have expenses? Are we anticipating expenses in the rest of the year that we need to cover? And again, not afraid to spend the money. I just always like to know, where are we, on the road.
So may I, and thank you, Ms. Hauser, for sharing. I'd like to perhaps propose that maybe we just need more clarity around what exactly it is that the board is requesting with regards to budget in terms of what you want to see, because I know that's something Rhonda can put together. That's not a problem, but and Rhonda, you can, I'm not trying to speak for you. You can certainly speak for yourself, but it may feel like a little bit of a moving target. And so whatever it is that will bring clarity, we can deliver that. I'm not sure that we always know from meeting to meeting what it is that would bring that level of clarity for you. And so, and I don't know if that's everyone on the board, if it's some, I don't know, but whatever it is, we're happy to do that. It would be helpful if we had that level of clarity.
So I'm going to just jump in here real quick and just a reminder that, we have a policy that if there's more than 2 hours of work that we're requesting of staff, that the board sort of decides as a group whether we want to request it or not. So if there are requests for what we want, specifically, Ms. Hauser, if there's something that you want from Rhonda, if you could send it to me, I'm happy to kind of get a pulse from the board if it's what we all would like to see, and then we can send that to Dr. Felder and Ms. Rath.
I am, just so you know, I'm not asking for a personal request for me. I am asking the board to consider a reporting structure that we consistently see quarter after quarter so that we understand not only what the spending is, but what categories, candor and transparency. So I want to know, you know, is it fund balance? Is it operating? Is it and Rhonda's talking to it, but it should really be in the reporting structure. It would make it so much easier.
So I hear what you're saying, and I don't disagree with you. I'm just wondering if you can write up specifically what it is that you want so that the board can come to a consensus about whether that is what works for all of us. And then we can make that formal request as a board.
We could do it that way, or we could try, we could do it that way. I think that's a little harder. I would like to, if it's okay with Dr. Felder and with Rhonda, I think maybe Rhonda and I can sit down, put together a structure.
Bonnie, the thing is that you keep asking for individual meetings with Ms. Rath, and that takes up a lot of time. And so the way that it works is that we sort of collectively make requests, and I'm not trying to block you from meeting with Ms. Rath. It's just that as a board, we try to act as a body and not personally consult with staff members making requests on behalf of the board. We kind of make a collective request. So it would just be helpful if you could put words to what you want, and then we can make that request. Like, I want to help you get what you want.
Okay, well, I think I did, and Ron, I don't know if you want to do it this way, but this is, I'm looking for standard presentation, budget versus actual for period, budget versus actual year to date, estimate to complete for the year. That's what I'm looking for. Then I'd like to see a list of unbudgeted expenses for the period and savings for the period.
And because those requests are going to take more than 2 hours to put together a new reporting form for the board, we need to make a request, and I need for you to just put that in writing in an email to me, and I will be happy to move it forward with, you know, much haste to try to get it to you as soon as possible. I'm not trying to block you. I know that this kind of thing, you know, frustrates you sometimes, but this is just how we operate, and individual board members don't make requests of staff like this.
Okay,
So
let me ask you a different question. I hear you, but what is the purpose of the budget committee if it's not our job to collectively put that request together? It shouldn't come from me. It should really come from the budget committee.
Okay, well, send it to Sarah and make a request on behalf of the committee, but you are, what you're doing is making a request and asking for it, but you're not working with the committee to do that. You're just saying what you want. And so I'm just requesting that we work more collectively. That's all I'm trying to put out there.
Okay, just trying to make it easier, but okay.
So I think it makes it easier for you this way. I don't think it makes it easier for our board to act as a body or for staff to act when it's done this way. That's why we have these typical group, you know, norms, and why the board sort of operates the way we do. I'm not trying to be difficult with you. I want to help you, but like, if we aren't following our typical protocol, it makes it difficult for staff. So I'm just asking you to please move forward that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
Bonnie, I mean, if you want to send it to me, I think, you know, the budget committee is the body that reviews budget to actuals each quarter. That's one of the things we do. And so if you want to send me more specifically what it is, you would imagine being laying that out, and then Ms. Rath and I can talk about how that makes sense. It sounds like they haven't been budgeting quarterly in the same way they've been looking at percent. Ms. Rath, correct me if I'm wrong, but it looks like you've been looking at percent to end of year, but not necessarily setting quarterly budgets. And so I'd want to have more conversation about that.
I heard that the funding comes in by year, but the expenses are budgeted monthly. That's what I heard.
Monthly.
Is that correct?
Expenses are budgeted annually. I track them monthly.
Got it. Okay.
And, you know, again, I just want to reiterate, by no shape, form, or any fashion are we intending to not be transparent. we want to be transparent, and we want to make sure that you have the information that you need to make the decisions that you need to make.
Right. And I am trying to, I find that we tend to take kind of a transactional approach to finance rather than a management approach to finance. And I think and we miss opportunities, and we lose visibility. And it's not because we don't have an incredible amount of information. I don't know if we have the information. I think there's other information that would help us make better decisions. And be more publicly transparent about what we're doing. That's my goal, is to do better management and less transactional work. I'll be quiet from now. I'll send you something, Sarah.
Great, sounds good.
Thank you, everyone, for that discussion. It's enlightening, and I appreciate it. Thank you. Move on to now taking a look at this point in time, expenditures that are becoming anticipated or known to us that are not budgeted. As we begin to look at opening schools, look at the options available for our students to best serve our students and community, we're seeing, and also, to take care of our staff and to make sure that our staff are not overstressed, as I know there's been a lot of conversations in regards to this. An anticipated expenditure that we are looking that may come to fruition is dedicated virtual academy teaching staff. And these would not be Orange County Schools teachers. They would actually be teachers that would be provided by Edmentum that has that virtual, that we have contracted academy coursework. We're also looking, as we are beginning to plan and transition to Plan B, and the options of our students that are in remote virtual learning and who may opt for any self-paced learning, having virtual academy learning coaches at each of our schools. These would be certified staff that are at those schools who would receive a stipend. For the lead person, this would be someone who would coordinate the learning coaches, which will be also Orange County School teaching staff, certified staff, who will be there to monitor cohorts of our self-paced or virtual learners, who will be there to support them and also be having weekly sessions with those students. We have those coaches that we're looking at and researching appropriate stipends for certified staff in the individual school buildings who would be willing to do this work. And then also the lead would be the point of contact at each of those schools for the virtual academy, so that community and parents, if they had specific questions, they would have an individual at that school who would be the point of contact for that virtual academy. We're looking at several scenarios now, looking at what other districts are doing surrounding us, and, working on a recommended stipend for staff who would be willing to do this work.
I have a question, Ms. Rath, and this might be for Dr. Felder. And I got to meet with Dr. Felder yesterday and hear about the Academy details, which I'm really pleased with. But I'm not remembering the first virtual academy dedicated teaching staff provided by Edmentum. I don't remember where that fits in, because I thought we had ended up using all Orange School certified teachers. I remember the part about the learning coaches and how that fits into our district structure, but where is the case that the teaching staff themselves would be Edmentum folks?
Yes, so thank you, Ms. Doyle, for that question. And so there's a lot still that we don't know. It will depend on how many students or families opt for one of the options under Virtual Academy that will be available. And so we just want to leave a door open should we need to contract with teachers outside of the district. Hopefully that won't be the case, but we didn't want to not keep that on our radar should we need to have additional teachers, certified teachers, to support the options that we are finalizing.
Oh. Thank you,
We just don't want to close any doors. There's so many variables that we're working with, and we just want to ensure that we would have access to. We've already reached out to Edmonton. They have a cadre of certified teachers who are familiar with the curriculum and the North Carolina standards. And so just have them on hold should we need them. Mm-hmm. Dr. Dawson, did you want to chime in? I see you have come on camera.
I only did just in case there were some questions related.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. All right. Did that answer your question, Ms. Doyle?
Yes, it absolutely did. Thank you very much.
You're so welcome.
So this is like in anticipation that if we, in the spirit of a standalone virtual academy, that we may need additional teaching staff to fill in, right? That's
exactly right. Yes, ma'am.
And do we have any idea, are we talking about $100,000, $1 million? Do we have any idea, order of magnitude, what this might be?
Not at this time. We won't know until the dust settles. And by that, I mean, we have to survey our family. We have to see what they select and where everything settles. And that's going to tell us and gauge that against our teaching staff. So there's a number of variables working here, but we have to keep that as a possibility. And so we just, and so that's the purpose of this. Hopefully we won't have to go there, but if we do, we want to know that we can do that.
Yeah, and if we have to go there, we have to go there. That's life, right? It's life in the big city.
That it is. Small cities, rural cities, right? Yep.
Yeah.
Another item that I would like to mention that has just recently came up that was not able to be added to the slide presentation in time was we're also looking at a part-time bilingual receptionist position to assist with calls in our transportation department, especially as we begin schools and to begin transporting our students again, to have a bilingual person to be able to assist our families should they have any questions.
And so if I could just tack on to that, thank you, Rhonda, for bringing it up to the Budget Committee's attention. And so, again, part of our goal to better engage our families and through the data from the Listen and Learns and other engagement, particularly with the Latinx community, that is a huge gap that we have when families contact the Department of Transportation. There isn't anyone who in that department who's bilingual. And so we can't be open schools realizing that transportation will be a big part of that and not be able to have staff who can speak the language, respond to calls as well as to in returning.
I'll try to exercise appropriate wait time in case there's any other questions or comments.
I have a question about the district-wide tutoring program that's being put together now. Is that budgeted or is that going to be an addition? I know we're contracting teachers to provide the tutoring. I was wondering where that money's coming from.
We have some some CARES gear money that has we haven't received it yet. They are still finalizing the application process for those funds that will flow through to us from federal funding resources. That a component of that is at risk and students in poverty's population. That will be our first resource for that initiative, will be those funds. And we're budgeted to receive roughly $77,000 from that resource that can be utilized in support of that additional tutoring.
Okay. And that'll cover it. You know, Rhonda, you're really good at this. You're really good at finding the money, if you will. But to me, it's like really exciting that the district is offering this to our families. And because you found the money, it loses visibility to what we're doing. So I don't know how to deal with that. But, you know, to me, it's an exciting program. It's not part of what we do every day. And that's, I'll just be quiet. And what about if we do anything to bring small groups back now? Does that fall under our budget? Because presumably it uses resources that we have.
So
That would be, I'm sorry, yes.
no, you're gonna,
Yes, ma'am, Ms. Hauser. In regards to, you know, we do have regular operating transportation that is budgeted to transport our students. Our teachers, their salaries are budgeted. And so as we begin bringing those small groups in, those would be things that are already accounted for in our operating budget.
It may also chime in here as well, and just say that there's also the possibility that we will need additional funding. For example, if a small groups are a plan includes bringing groups back, say on a Saturday for a Saturday school, or any before or after school opportunities, that's outside of the normal duty hours for teaching staff, then we'd have to pay stipends in those. So until we see the plans, we may have to pay additional funds to run buses on weekends. I don't know yet. So those plans are being drafted, and there may be additional dollars attached according to what the plans pan out to be.
Okay, great. I tell you, I love spending money on things that matter, so that's really good news.
Me too.
And so when do we anticipate having a better understanding of the cost of things on this slide and other initiatives like that?
So with regards to the things on this slide, and I'm not sure I can see the full slide, but anything related to Virtual Academy will come after that survey. We've got to get the next survey out that the schools are going to facilitate and see where, you know, the decisions land, and that will help in regards to that. And then schools are working on developing small group plans and how to bring back students. And so that will be presented to the board in November at your November 9th meeting. So we'll have a better understanding at that time.
So potentially our November budget committee meeting, but if not December.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Even at the November board meeting. So
Yeah.
You could argue that we've got $1 million in a surplus that could be reallocated to that. That's kind of my framing on it. So anyway.
All right.
Are we at the end of this? Yes, this is what I thought. Okay, so can I just suggest we take a 10-minute break now and come back at 10:45?
Absolutely.
Okay, for folks. Great. Thanks all.
Yes, ma'am, I am.
Welcome back. I see Miss Hauser, Dr. Felder. Miss Doyle, are you there? All right, we'll give her another minute.
Hey y'all, this is Carrie. I'm back. I'm just
Hello.
saying.
No, that makes sense. Sorry about your Wi-Fi speeds. All right, so ready to move on to the next item, supervised learning labs. I think for this, I think we should aim to spend the last 20 minutes or so of our meeting talking about the plans for the equity audit. And so let's say we have until about 11:40 to talk about supervised learning labs. That works.
Okay.
Great.
I'll do my best to keep an eye on the clock, and please, anyone else chime in as we get close to that time. We're going to transition now into talking about supervised learning labs, and I will lead us through this discussion, but of course, we have Richard Lewis and I believe Miss Melanie Stowe, who are also in this meeting, who will be available to answer more specific questions should you have them. I believe the pictures that you're looking at here represent our supervised learning lab settings that we have currently up and going. That would be at Pleasant Green United Methodist Church, as well as the Welcome Center Y program. You can see how that looks with the social distancing and the masking for our students who are participating in those supervised learning labs. Sorry for there. Okay, I want to begin this discussion by taking a look at what each of our schools is in comparison to our current enrollment. When we talk about bringing 50% of that enrollment back, what that is, and based upon the previous surveys that we have conducted, it was a pretty across the board split of 60% consistently were opting that they would return to some form of in-person, and 40% of our students, even by school, would opt for full remote learning. So what I would like to do here is set the stage for a recommendation that we will have in phases 3 and 4, which will be coming in further slides, if I may just take a moment here. When you look at our day 20 average daily membership, which is at 7,008 students, we were projected to be at 7,381. When you look at that in comparison to 50% of our based upon guidelines that when we return to in-person instruction, that the goal for safety of our students and staff is to keep each of the buildings as close to 50% or at 50% returning for in-person instruction. When you look at that, you will see 2 schools which which we looked at and considered for our recommendation for phase 3 and phase 4 based upon the capacity of what would be available, because the goal for these supervised learning labs is we do not want to hamper the ability for any students to return to in-person instruction. So by standing up a supervised learning lab in any of our schools, we want to make sure that that does not impact that. And we also want to make sure that location is good for our families and what will serve our families best. So, again, just setting the groundwork and setting the frame of the recommendation that we will be talking about coming forward, and this is how we came to that recommendation.
Rhonda, could I ask a question about this information here, which is really useful? So if I look all the way down at the bottom and I'm looking at what's the building's 50% capacity and what's our estimated in person, I'm seeing that across the entire system, we've got a wiggle room of like less than 20 seats in buildings. And I'm seeing some schools are 50%. I mean, Cameron Park is like, 50% capacity is 250 kids, but we think there might be 318 kids who plan to come back in person. I know I don't want to get off on a whole sidetrack here, but that does make me, I see that certain buildings would have capacity for a supervised learning lab, but I also see that some schools are potentially in trouble in terms of all their students being able to return to the same building, and wondering how that factors in here.
That is
But
a
that's,
great.
I'm sorry, but my understanding of looking at it is that's not split into the alternating weeks, though. Am I right?
That is correct.
Oh, that would be that's the total in person. So only half of that column would be back at any one time. Okay. That also makes me feel better about my other thing, which was have we like counted the number of staff members who need to be in the building too, in that total capacity? Okay. Great. So we're in better shape because of that estimated in person. Somewhere roughly half of them would be back at any one time, and so that fits within our 50% capacity.
And then again, let me reiterate that this estimated in person is strictly math based upon a trend, that as we do this additional survey and get more specific numbers for each of those individual schools, we will be updating and looking at that information in that context.
Yeah, great.
And again, all completely off topic, but it does raise the question, I'm particularly interested in our Title I elementary schools, of whether we could bring kids back without a rotation at all. Where does the priority come? Do we come back? Do we want to bring all the kids back? Or do we want to put a supervised learning lab in the building? And I think that's a priority decision that we need to make. I mean, I personally would prefer to bring kids back for school than put a learning lab in the building. That would be my preference. But if that's a choice.
And, as more information and as the governor has opened up the state and moved us into a different phase, the 50% capacity may be may change. It may be, we're looking into now based upon what we are actually able to social distance safely within each of those spaces, which in a lot of cases will be more than 50%.
That's even better.
Even better. This is just a baseline of where we are looking, because we know it is the desire of the board as well as our staff not to prevent students from being able to return for in-person instruction. And, we will not make a recommendation or do anything that would jeopardize that.
Okay, good.
Okay. Here's just a relook at our phase 1 and phase 2 supervised learning labs that have already been stood up and that are operating. Phase 1 is the YMC program that opened at the Welcome Center. There's a capacity of 75 students that can be accommodated in that space. Right now, there are 43 spots that are open. The charge is $197 a week. And, Orange County Schools is not charging the YMC anything or any usage fees to utilize this space for our students. Phase 2 is the Pleasant Green United Methodist Church location. There's a capacity of 20 students that can be safely socially distanced in that facility. 5 spots are currently open. This is free for our McKinney-Vento and ESSA students, as well as any Orange County School EC and pre-K staff that have childcare needs. They can also utilize this area for that free of charge. Transportation is provided, and the estimated cost for the staffing as well as the transportation for this facility is roughly $6,000 a week. And if you recall, it was approved and recommended that we utilize the fund balance available in the School Community Relations Fund to be able to provide that free of charge to our families. So that's just a reminder of phase 1 and phase 2 of the supervised learning labs that are currently operating.
Sarah, do you want to ask or you want me to ask? And
Sweat.
why can't the kids in the Pleasant Green facility be moved into the Y?
Melanie or Richard, would you be able to assist me in answering that?
Yeah. Well, I'm not able to unmute.
Oh,
We hear you.
Oh, okay. Good morning. Apologize. It says I'm still muted. But so with regards to the phase 1 and phase 2 site, we
lost your sound, Melanie.
And video.
Okay, good morning, everyone. And your question was, why aren't these students at the YMCA? Because it costs more to have those students at the YMCA than it does at the Pleasant Green. And so we're able to provide this free of charge for our McKinney-Vento and ESSA students. Melanie may have a bit more insights on that. I'm sure that she's going to try to come back on. I'm just trying to understand, like, why aren't they at the Y?
Mm-hmm.
Because most of the students at the Y, that is, you have to pay to go there, meaning the $197 per week, that's what the cost would be. It actually costs less for them to be at the Pleasant Green United Methodist Church.
I don't know. I'm doing the math. The math says that $6,020 a week. I realize transportation is in there. It's costing us $300 a week to have a student at Pleasant Green. So if I give the Y, if I just pay their fee at the Y, the district pays their fee at the Y, isn't it a kind of a wash? I mean, isn't that better to fill the Y and have a more inclusive student environment?
If I may interject here, the $197 a week, I believe this would be accurate. That doesn't include transportation.
Right.
That $197 is just for those students. That's their fee. If we factor in transporting those students to that facility, that cost will increase.
Okay, so I'm at All right, that's fine.
And maybe we can come back around to this when Ms. Stowe is back and has audio and all that too.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I feel like I should talk really fast. I know what I missed in the past 2 minutes. But what we've seen with the YMCA site and Pleasant Green is that our numbers doubled within 2 to 3 weeks. And so, Ms. Hauser, our plan at a point is to consolidate Pleasant Green into another location. We just need to get phase 3 up and running so that we're able to move those students where it makes the most sense. And also with our staff, we had 38 employees reply that they needed this supervised learning lab for their children, and that totals 48 total students. And so right now we don't want to close Pleasant Green until we absorb those 48 children as of December 7th. So our plan is to close Pleasant Green. It's just, right now we need to make sure we have the capacity to serve all staff that have requested this.
Thank you.
Okay, so now let's move into phase 3 and phase 4. Our recommendation goes. If you recall from that first slide that we looked at and looking at schools and capacity, we looked at that to try to determine the best location to recommend for us to open our next phase of these supervised learning labs to meet the needs of the staff as well as to meet the needs of anyone who is currently utilizing the Pleasant Green facility. Our recommendation for phase 3 would be Gravelly Hill Middle School, which would allow us capacity of 20. And by being in the schools, being here, we will not jeopardize the capacity or allowing any students to return for in-person instruction. We would plan to have 9 spots that would be open for staff. The other staff that had responded as a need, our first option would be to fill those spots at the Y with those staff members who had expressed a need. And then those remaining students, we would propose or recommend that they be put in the spots at Gravelly Hill Middle School free of charge. Then that would allow us to have 11 tuition-based spots that would be opened up for any additional families, or it would be families who would opt to potentially take opportunities of these supervised learning labs. I'll exercise wait time to let you guys comment. And then, of course, Richard and Melanie, please interject as you feel need.
I'm wondering if the 11 spots would be sliding scale similar to the Y, or how we're thinking about that.
From my understanding, and Richard, please correct me, they would be sliding scale, that it would be tuition based upon a sliding scale.
And is it not true that we can also accept, is it DHS, or I'm sorry, I'm getting the letters wrong.
That's a great question, Dr. Felder. The DSS subsidies, from my understanding, are not available at a middle school because this is not one of our licensed locations. Is that accurate, Melanie?
That's correct.
And so then I'm wondering, is there a reason, what is the reason that we're doing phase 3 and phase 4 versus maybe opening these 2 sites on sort of a similar timeline?
So part of that is based on the recommendation from the health department and what we've learned in best practices to phase in locations and to meet the needs of our current families and staff. And so phase 3 would open December 7th. And between the 3 sites, we would be able to cover the staff who expressed a need for supervised learning when they return on the 7th of December. And then phase 4 would open along with Central Elementary, actually a week before. I think that's going to be the 19th. And what we'll be able to do is to shift, some students will shift because Central is a better location for them based on their base school. And that is the point of which phase 2 may at some point close. We just need to have 3 sites open so that we can shift accordingly.
I have a question about Gravelly Hill Middle School. So the comment that DSS subsidies wouldn't apply because it's a middle school, just want to make sure I understand correctly. The Learning Lab itself is for, the students aren't grouped by age, right? So there might be elementary school students there. So is that unfortunate that they can't use, you know, if there's an elementary school student who would have DSS subsidies, but because the location's a middle school, they can't be used? Is that correct, or am I misunderstanding?
So no, you're not. We will make sure if a student's eligible for DSS subsidies, they would be at Central Elementary, that because that is a licensed site.
Okay.
And we don't anticipate that until second semester. Again, we will also be open for families if they have needs as well.
And how much is that subsidy? How much is
The
the
subsidy
subsidy?
is based on the market rate and the amount of need of the family. So each family gets a different amount.
What's the range? Is it, do you have a? This is like camp, the way camp works, essentially?
What happens is the DSS looks at the family's income. And so it could be you may receive a subsidy of $50 to offset your cost for childcare, or it could be to $100. I could get those numbers to you if you'd like for me to give you the market rate for DSS as well as the potential percentages a family could qualify for if you like.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand, like, you know, Sarah's talking earlier, because we're already decided as a board that we're going to give subsidies to kids who qualify for free and reduced lunch. I'm wondering how this adds to that or how it all works. It's a little confusing to me.
DSS is a Department of Social Services. So
Understand.
yes, those families actually receive that from our local, from someone outside of the school district. What I think our cost is the cost for staff, as well as transportation in some instances.
Actually, if we're subsidizing to $50 a week, DSS could, in these centers, DSS could cover those, would cover those subsidies. That's what kind of what you're saying, I think.
No, ma'am. I apologize. Okay. OCS is paying for OCS staff's children.
Right.
DSS pays for non-staff children.
Yes. Understood that. And the Orange County School Board said for kids that qualify for free and reduced lunch, will pay $50 a week. So I was curious if the DSS subsidy would take them to zero or would cover the ARPA. You don't have to answer it. It's just a little confusing.
What the board approved was in phase 2 in Pleasant Green doing that subsidy. And it doesn't seem like we have any students in these numbers that are using that. But we did say we would need to revisit that as we looked at expanding, given like the total cost of that. I do have a related, well, semi-related question. I was speaking to a teacher who said they were working with the school social worker to try to get a student into one of the learning labs, and had been working on that. I don't know any of the details, but I'm assuming the student didn't qualify under McKinney-Vento or something like that. But are there situations where schools and social workers are able to identify students who need a spot who could take one of those 5 remaining spots at Pleasant Green or at the Y?
So yes, Richard works very closely with the school social workers, and at the same time, we have to be cognizant that what the board approved was free for Tier 1, which was McKinney-Vento and ESSA students, which at that time there were 51 total. And so once if we increase and cover those 5 spots, then if a student is in need that meets that criteria, then we would, in essence, we would need to open another location. So with free and reduced lunch, there were about 750 students that qualified, I believe. And so we have not yet pursued that group because, frankly, we don't have the capacity to serve 750 students. Right now, we're trying to meet staff needs, which we are with these 4 phases. There won't be any staff needs. And then the other piece I want to add on phase 4, we have families who, as of August, when the Y opened, said we're ready to come back, but we cannot come back without the subsidy. And so that's why it's really important for us to get that site open as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I continue to be kind of confused on need versus cost versus funding, because I think there are 3 different issues. So I want to go back to need for a second. If we took all our families that need service, and as I understand the learning labs, let's take the staff away for a second. Let's talk about our families. That the idea is mom drops the kid or dad drops the kid off at the learning center. And so if I think about the geography of the county, I think I have a learning lab at Cedar Grove that's not ours, that they're operating, that's free, if I had to guess. Then I have Gravelly in Efland, and then Pathways looks like it has capacity, and that covers that northeastern segment of the county. So I'm wondering why we're not thinking about Pathways. And then Cedar Ridge, which is the other lower capacity one, and that would cover the southwestern. So it's like, is there any interest in providing some geographic coverage to make it easier for our families to use the centers that need them? So it's, I'll just ask my questions one at a time. Is that something that is an option for us, or is it too late?
Well, anything's an option. It's not, and nothing's too late if it serves the needs of our families. We did survey all of our families, and keeping in mind that last year we did run an after-school program, and so we maintained communication with those families, and we just have not received the level of interest to warrant staffing a site in addition to what we've currently staffed. We just have to be assured that there's the need that exists there when we, stand that up.
Well, it's kind of like Central versus Central and the Wellness Center are in reasonable proximity to each other. If we have 30 seats left at the Welcome Center, would we be better off just subsidizing our staff there, for example? Just
Isn't that the recommendation? I think that is the recommendation, right? That a number of those YMCA seats would be staff.
At this point, that's not our recommendation. So the YMCA charges, and so if we have staff children to go there, the rate is $197 a week. Whereas if we funnel our staff children through phase 3 or phase 4 or Pleasant Green, any of the 3 we operate, then we're paying our staff to oversee that. And I hope that makes sense, but that's where we're at right now. So the YMCA is important because they meet needs of full paying families. They meet needs of, as you're aware, they have 2 groups of students that are ours that pay $10 a week, and we still haven't filled those spots. So, you know, we also had the internet hubs. You know, we continue to try things as a district, but until we're meeting capacity, we're just not sure that the need exists. And as I stated, the only need we're aware of that we haven't met are DSS families who have told us we will come, but we have to get the subsidy. We cannot accept the subsidy until we're at an elementary school. The YMCA is not licensed. OCS is. And that's the big difference, which is why we have to get at into an elementary school. And I think, I don't know who brought it up earlier, but we also can't interfere with instruction. The priority is for students to return, which is one of several reasons we selected Gravely Hill and Central, because we don't feel like, and have communicated with those, that the administration, that we won't impact or impede their ability to bring students back in January.
Yeah, and Pathways Elementary has 7 pre-K and EC classes that Central doesn't have. So Pathways is ramping up in another area. I don't know if part of the mission.
So, is there an answer to that? I don't want to.
Well, we were certainly aware of that and had to take that into consideration. Yes.
So Chapel Hill School, just by context, and I don't know what their numbers are, but they made a decision to keep all their learning centers out of their schools, and they're operating 2. I think one is at the Y and one is at Hargraves. And I was curious why they were able to, and of course they don't have our geographic dispersion, but I was curious why they did it that way versus kind of aligning facilities to, and I don't know if what their fee is or how that's working. Do we know?
So I am aware, I'm sorry, that they did use their CARES Act funding to make those opportunities free. And so that's why, I mean, that's the cost structure. That's how they chose to allocate those funds. And then we have communicated with multiple outside offsite locations, as you know, we are at Pleasant Green, and we have others in the queue ready if there was a need. There just hasn't been. And again, the other piece on the offsite is we aren't licensed offsite, even though we follow all the same protocols, but we're not licensed and we're not able to work with families that receive subsidies. And those families do have needs, which is why they receive subsidies. So our goal is and continues to be to open the Central Elementary site.
Did you think about flipping these? So doing Central first before? My concern there is just knowing that there are some kids, right, who receive subsidies who could really use this. And so waiting till January just feels hard on sort of an emotional level. Wondering if you thought about that.
Yes, I appreciate that. Yes. However, we were directed to take care of staff's children, and so that takes the precedent. And again, we are phasing in sites, and we are advised and will continue to follow opening sites at different times to ensure that we can train and again, to ensure for consistency with staff. So we looked at the 48 children that 38 staff members need services for, and this phase 3, phase 4 makes the most sense, because they also noted their base school, the schools that they could travel to, recognizing we won't open a site at all of our schools. So this model made the most sense for those staff that need those services as of December 7th. And then, yes, we will take care of our OCS children right after that.
And actually, some of these children are OCS children as well.
Yes, 75% of these students are OCS children. Thank you for bringing that up.
Mm-hmm. So okay, I'm sorry, can you say again the total number of student slots we need for staff?
Yeah,
Okay, so-
38 employees, and they have 48 children, so siblings. And we've already placed some of those because they are EC pre-K students, teachers, or they were staff that are currently on site and needed the services. The majority of them, however, will be returning on the 7th, and we've already accommodated those needs. But of course, we needed to present this and get feedback either today and or potentially Monday to ensure that this is how we will move forward, because we don't want to notify staff that here's what we're doing if that's not the case. But this is our plan, and we can cover all of the staff's needs that have been shared with us.
Okay, so just to make sure that I'm understanding, so the proposal, the phase 3 and phase 4, this is where staff children would go. Is that so staff children would go to which sites, and then how many spots do we think we would still have available for other students?
All right, I'm going to let Richard calculate how many spots are available to other students, but we are working with our families, and they have 3 locations. I mean, the ones that need it now are either at the Y or Pleasant Green. And if they're going to the Y, we're just paying that from fund balance. You know, $197 a week, we're paying it because we need to meet staff needs right now. And then we also know that on December 7th, we will open Gravelly Hill, and we will be able to accommodate via those 3 locations, preference given to Gravelly Hill and Pleasant Green. But those 3 locations, the 48 children, if staff still continue to need those. Again, staff expressed interest in the sites, and unfortunately, there wasn't a predominant site that made sense. I mean, literally every one of our schools was checked. 4 here, 5 here. So we're trying to make it work for them. And then staff will know that as of January 19th, Central will open. And if that's more convenient for them, then they would be able to transfer their students. So we will accommodate all staff as of December 7th with our 3 sites. And we still have room to grow.
So, so between 3 and 4, if there's 50 available, and I feel like the number staff students was something like 47 or 48. Yeah, 47 or 48. If that only leaves a few, you know, maybe 3. So I guess I have a 2-part question. How would we absorb Pleasant Green kids if there's only that, like 3? And also, I'm just trying to think and not getting really clear in my head. So will staff still have these needs? You know, if I'm a teacher and I have 2 kids and I'm every day, but my kids are hybrid, do they need childcare alternating weeks? You know, will we be at almost like half the need because of the alternating week schedules? Do you know what I'm asking? Does that make sense? Like what will the shift in numbers look like once we're in Plan B? That's my question.
So the 2-part question. With Pleasant Green, if Pleasant Green is utilized, then Pleasant Green makes sense. And which it does, is a 75% capacity right now. We've continued to have discussions weekly to make the most use of our staff to be efficient and effective. And so if at any point Pleasant Green drops, as we open more sites, we have the ability to scale up. Pleasant Green cannot hold more than 20 students. There's a space capacity issue. With Central and Gravelly, we could hold more students, so we could increase. And so that's where we are there. But we're also not opening 75 capacity. We want to scale up, just as the Y did successfully. With regards to the students, the staff students, so we will. We know what the need is. We know 75% are Orange County school students. We have not asked, and that will be part of our family survey, Are they alternating weeks, alternating days? Do they need this full time? Do they need it part time? If there's 25% that go to another district, are those districts open? Are these students? So there's a lot of questions which we can answer and get those answers. We just need to firm up that this is how we're proceeding. Again, we can cover the 48 children without a problem. We just, again, need to follow up with them, and that'll be part of the family survey that students or families will be answering. Identifying alternating weekday and et cetera, however we are moving forward.
Thank you, Ms. Law. Just one more quick follow-up question. So did I understand you correctly? So if the phase 3 has capacity of 20 and the phase 3 is capacity of 30, are you saying that you could potentially expand those capacity sizes, but you're not wanting to do it right away? You're wanting to incrementally. Okay, gotcha. So it's not a firm 50 capacity. That makes sense.
That is correct.
This line of conversation is really cementing for me the idea that if our buildings can hold more than, can accommodate kids coming every day as opposed to every other, or, you know, whichever alternating days, alternating weeks, that we get as many of them in as we can, you know, knowing that even in this model, like a kid who is on free and reduced price lunch may not have like an option for childcare via the, like, it just makes me, because of, I think Ms. Hauser brought this up earlier, like the interplay between, you know, capacity in the building, standing up more learning labs, bringing more students back for instruction directly, that, you know, it underlines for me the sort of like importance of bringing back as many kids as we can, you know, if there's an opportunity to bring back full time, more kids, that we do that.
And I would add, especially our Title I schools, right? Central, you have Central designated as a learning lab, and I'd rather have all those kids back in school.
Yeah. And I would say, I think that the Title I designation is like a cutoff, and there are some schools like, I think Pathways, there are some schools that are like right below the cutoff. So there's a lot of kids at those schools who have similar need, you know, who have similar needs to a kid at Central. And so thinking about,
You're right.
Yeah. But the orientation of students in free and reduced price lunch, you know, students who are receiving tier 2 or tier 3 instruction, you know, English language learners, you know, are there groups of kids that we can bring back more 100% time, which I know is more complicated than just doing that, but yeah.
I was kind of prioritizing, Sarah, you're saying prioritizing bringing big kids back. We'd rather bring kids back for school than bring them back for learning lab. They're coming back, let's put them in learning lab. Let's put them in school.
If there's ways, yeah, if there's ways to do that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's another, that was, I thought, part of Chapel Hill's justification that said we don't want to compromise our, so they're not bringing their kids back at all, but they didn't want to mess up their buildings with learning labs. Two questions. First of all, and maybe again too late on this, especially with school starting, but the board never got a chance to talk about working families. We talk about free and reduced lunch families, but we never got a chance to talk about the working families, because I hear all the time that $200 a week is too expensive. And so that's almost $1,000 a month per kid. And at that point, here's the words they use. We're thinking about private school. At those rates, we're thinking about private school. Why put them in a learning lab when they can go to a private school that's open? So that's kind of what we've created with this price. It's very complicated pricing model. And so I don't know if it's too late for that, you know, but if we drop the price, would more people participate in the learning labs? You know, so I just don't know that. Let me ask a more fundamental question. on phase 2, $6,020 dollars a week, and it's $300 per kid. If I say 100 is for the transportation, so let's say that would say $200 a kid. If we close that center, does that money go away, or is that just a reallocation of expense? I don't know if I'm getting my question out.
I
Why can't I
understand.
take the $6,000 and give it to the Y and put 20 kids in the Y? That's the basic question.
So I understand your question. So the model we have to follow for safety and our own, best practice model. We follow staff ratios, and so closing a site, it's not like Walmart. It's not the more we bring in, the less it costs. We're in a human child needs ratio basis, that world. And so the $200, that's how much it costs to staff it, period, to follow the ratios. That's where that dollar amount comes from. So when we look at our staff from December 7th through the end of June at 25 weeks of school, if they need it every week, $200 a week, that's going to be $240,000. So we know we have to be able to meet that need. If they do, in fact, those 48 students or children need it through June every week. And so everything else kind of gets based on that, because we need to, obviously absorb those costs through the fund balance with SCR.
I'm completely confused now. Going back to, if we open schools in January, the kids go to school, right? We're not offering learning labs for kids where school is open. Is that correct?
The board meeting, when that motion was made, it was with regards to long-term child care for staff's children and to look at supervised learning labs to take care of that.
Okay. I'm sorry. Maybe I'm lost. I thought I'm talking about in general the learning lab capacity. Are we talking about the staff kids? And again, and their schools open. I don't know how to have the conversation. It's too hard for me. I'm just lost. Maybe someone else can help. Can anyone help?
Well, I think you're asking if it's a hybrid model, then wouldn't the students who are children of staff members be in a classroom and not in the learning lab for 4 out of the 10 days? I think that's what you're asking. And so would it cost, would you be able to potentially like double the number of students you're serving or something? No?
Yeah, I was asking in general about the capacity of the learning labs and kind of what it would really cost us to make it free. Because I don't, it's, phase 2 at UMC is not free. It's costing us $6,000 a week. So rather than open up a separate lab to just, because to use, I think excess capacity is cheaper than capacity. So I would always like to use excess capacities. That's one general question. On the staff, I do get confused on when, again, if they go back to school, if we have capacity, especially in our elementary schools, if they're going back to school, if we can bring them back full-time to school, then the learning lab the need for the learning lab kind of goes away. So I don't even know where to begin with that, I'm having trouble. There's too many moving parts here and I can't, it's just too hard for me. I can't. It's way beyond my ability.
I think you're doing a great job.
I don't know. It's too complicated. I think there's demand. I think there's costs, and I think there's something. break even, and you guys have crossed all the lines for me.
Well, I hear you, Ms. Hauser, and I agree. I hear you, though. I have to acknowledge what you're saying about how, you know, the information is being received. And so we are dealing with a lot of variables, and I can't emphasize that enough. It is complex. There are lots of needs, and we're trying to meet those needs, and do them in a way. We have to do them in a way that ensures safety, that we're following protocols, that we're taking baby steps, and it's a lot. So I get it. I find myself there as well, trying to make sense of it all, but it is just it's very complex, and there are just so many different variables. I mean, we have staff who attend Orange County schools. We have staff with children who don't, who may be on different schedules. Yeah. So
here's how the parents put it to me. Let me just put it the way I get it. We have a school district that's designed to serve 7,000 kids or 7,500 kids a day in the buildings. Those buildings are closed. Why are you charging me at all for Learning Lab? That's what parents say to me. You know, they think they should be free.
And the reason for that is because we need staff to staff the Learning Labs. We can't use the staff that we have, for example, TAs or teachers. We can't use that staff. So as Ms. Stowe said, the cost is to staff them. That's where the cost is coming from. We have to identify staff, and it's you know, it's one thing if we have repurposed staff to take temperatures. You just can't have okay, now you're going to work in a supervised learning lab. You're working with children. You're working with children all day. It's different.
Yeah, I understand all that. I guess I can't tell if I took 100 kids and put them in the Y, or 75 kids in the Y Learning Lab, and filled it, what would the cost be? You know, without any of these funding subsidies, what would the cost be to run a Learning Lab for 100 kids? And what would be the weekly or monthly cost to do that? And then I would want to pull out the subsidies and say, if I move those folks to Pleasant Green at $6,000 a week, what do I save by using these McKinney-Vento subsidies? And are you saying they're not available to the kids if they go in the Y? You know,
I think we're
maybe
starting to run out of time a little bit too.
okay.
Maybe
I'll stop. It's just confusing to me. It's just too hard to feel like we've trifurcated the problem. I am just ethically where I'm having the biggest trouble is that we've created these exclusionary environments, and that really gives me, you know, it's like, oh, you walk into our Pleasant Green center, we know those are McKinney-Vento students, and so I feel like we've created a privacy issue and other things. I don't even want to go there, but it's so confusing to me. I just can't. I can't do it. I'll be quiet. I'm done.
One thing that may be helpful here. Oh, and I see we have another topic is to understand, you know, what is the cost to the district of, you know, the child of a teacher, someone receiving DSS subsidies, somebody paying full, you know, what is the cost to the district of by type of student or something like that? Can I ask a clarifying question? I know we may just, we'll cut into this time for this other topic, but back in phase 1, the YMCA, I think maybe I didn't understand. Can you go back one more slide, please, Rhonda? Okay. All right. I think an earlier draft of this had suggested putting the children in phase 1 and filling out the rest of these spots there, which is why I got the idea that that's what we were doing, and that would have more spots for other children in the later phases. But it sounds like that's not what the recommendation is right now. but it seems like maybe it would be cheaper or equal price. Has that changed or?
Well, it has, yes, that was an update. I want to point out that the enterprise model is a business model, which has successfully worked, certainly with a fund balance of what it has, 560,000. And Richard Lewis, who's on this call, has a.
I'm sorry, Ms. Stowe, we lost you.
Did you lose?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, sorry. But we do have a business model and we can break even and generate a profit. But we can do that because we have licensed sites once we're at our elementary schools. That's the goal. That's where we need to get. And we have slides for that, but we're happy to share that at another time. We don't have slides for today, but we have those slides. This model with phase 1 through 4 will work and help, but we have to get to phase 4. And so sending students to the Y, it is not licensed. Therefore, they do not accept or take DSS subsidies. That's where we need to get.
But could we send the teachers' children to the Y? I'm assuming teachers' children are not providing transportation, that the teachers are dropping off their kids on their way to work or something like that. And
it would cost the same. It costs the same if they go to the Y or if they come to Gravely Hill. And so we need to build our capacity. To Ms. Hauser's point, we don't want a location to only be for an identified group of kids. We want locations to make the most sense for families. That's where we want, and we will be there on January 19th, where students will be where it makes the most sense for their families. They won't be at a location because of what box they checked. That's where we really need to get to.
Right. I guess I'm just wondering from a moving people around and making spots available perspective, if most of those teachers, students were here, it wouldn't only be teacher students because there's a bunch of kids already there, right? But that if many of them went there, then when you opened Gravely, you might not need as many spots for teachers' children and at Central, and you could open up more spots potentially for other, students who need them. I don't know if I'm making sense, but if it costs the same either way, that might be a possibility.
Right, especially for Gravely, right? Because it doesn't take the subsidy.
I don't know. It might be a thing to think about. I don't know.
I'm taking notes. I know that Richard is as well. And we do hear you. We want to meet the needs of families. That is what we want to do. And that's one reason phase 2 was so important, because when we talk about the needs of families, students who are in homeless situations are families that are in foster care. There are significant needs, and that site is going really well. But we also know that only a third of that population took us up on the offer.
Right.
They too have fears about health, safety, whatever. And so again, we continue to phase folks in, and once we have the 4 locations, it will be a matter of what makes the most sense from a convenience standpoint for those families.
I mean, this is very complicated, and all of that makes sense. I guess what I have in my head is knowing that, talking to that teacher about that student who she's trying to get into a learning lab somewhere. And I do think there's, I don't know that this model has a play, I'm just trying to figure out, is there a way to free up more of those spots for students like that? Because I do think there is that additional demand that probably our social workers could tell us about, even among the students who are receiving free and reduced price lunch, or other students where the need is particularly acute, that I bet we could fill if we could move some of those children over to the Y and have more spots at Central, or something like that I bet we have students who need them.
I would encourage you, Ms. Hauser, anyone on this call to send those requests to myself or Richard. We we follow up on every single one. So I'm
Okay,
not
great.
aware of those, and we will follow up and make what we need to make work.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, yeah. And yeah, I think the student, I'm not going to get into student details. Thank you. I will follow up with the teacher.
Okay.
I know we also have before and after school to talk about. Should we move there next? Is there anything else on supervised learning labs that you all need from us?
I think we're good.
I think we're
It's
good
the
as
same
well.
team presenting on
Yeah,
the before and after school care. So it's again, Ms. Stowe and Mr. Lewis.
awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, I can, Melanie and Richard, I will start with the, we have heard the need from the board as well as the desire to support our students as we begin opening our schools back. And, we heard based upon the start and end times that were approved at the previous board meeting that we may need to look at considering before school care. And so we have an update here as to what it is looking like at this point in time for our before school care. It would be available from 7:30 to 9:30. It would be available at all of the 7 elementary school locations. That right now we're looking at a capacity of 20 at each of the school locations. It would require 3 part-time staff per location. That's 10 hours a week at $15 an hour would roughly equate to a $450 per week cost for that staff. This would allow us to have 10 spots that would be available free to staff. And then we would have remaining available spots that we would recommend offering to families at a cost of $45 a week or $180 a month, which would offset the cost of the staff to facilitate these programs. The after school would also be at all of the 7 elementary school locations from 3:30 until 6, with a capacity of 40 at each of the locations. Based upon our ratios and safety, we would look at 5 part-time staffs at each of the location. And this would enable us to have spots, again, that would be free to staff, where I believe historically, Richard, please correct me if I'm wrong, there was a 30% reduced price or fee that was charged for staff. It was not free. Based on this model, it would be free to staff who opted to utilize it. And then, of course, those remaining spots would be open to families, either that would be on a fee that would be a sliding scale, or also a DSS subsidy for those who qualify.
And would Hillary, go ahead.
Ms. Rath, do you know if the before school care capacity that's available at each location would cover the need of our staff?
That's a good question. The reason that the capacity is different for the before school care from the after school care is need. We feel like, based upon the discussions and the survey responses that we have seen, that there's a greater need for the after school care versus the before school care. But I don't believe that I am out of line in that we would be able to adjust those capacities if that need was greater.
Okay, great. Thank you.
How does the after school cost of $56.50 a week compare to what we normally charge for after school?
Richard, would you be able to assist me in answering that question?
Yes, ma'am. It is quite a bit less. And let me get to our actual rates for last year. So right now, that's the rate that we would have charged last year. By us giving it to staff, this allows us to charge this rate that we usually charge, and it'll offset the cost of staff. So when I look at it, you actually taking the 5650 and it's covering everybody at that site. So the site is self-sustaining. If you look at it per person, it's half the price. If you look at it as an individual, the cost is the same per child.
I'm looking at it, I guess I'm looking at it from a parent perspective that last year, if they had their kid in after school, are you saying they would have spent $100 a week? Is that?
No, ma'am. It's the same cost that they would have paid last year, but by us covering staff, then I'm looking at only half of, like last year would have been everybody paying.
We would have made a profit.
So, yes. Well, actually, it covers all the costs. So with revenue, it goes into our fund balance. Ms. Rath is much more well-versed in that. We just charge what it costs to run the program because everyone's salary comes out of that.
So do we think we would still break even here or make a profit off of this?
Based on
Trying to
my
follow that
projections,
last
hopefully we'll break even.
That is correct. Break even. The goal, of course, is to not make a profit.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Rhonda. I cringe when I hear profit, the word profit in this context.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a board decision. It's not a budget committee. I mean, I know we created the scheduling challenge, and to ask people to pay for before school care, I think it would be, I have trouble with that. I think it's a problem that we created, and I don't think we should be asking anybody to pay for it. After school, if it's what they're used to, it's another issue. Is there a reason that we wouldn't think that our families are in? Do we have any idea if our families are interested in this? Again, because we've created this kind of convoluted scheduling situation because of our transportation and other issues. So, is there any idea of what our families are going to need beyond the staff?
Mr. Lewis, can you speak to that? I understand you may have data in terms of families who have reached out, waiting and wondering about the opportunity for this kind of service.
Yes. At the beginning of this, we did survey parents, and a lot of our families reached out on top of emails that I've received. However, we have not had anything open to the general public other than the YMCA. And the Y does have the sliding scale, so anyone who did apply was referenced to that. But we still have families that want the program that we provided last year. That's the request that keeps coming to my attention. But we do, I can give you numbers if you like from the survey we sent a while back. We also have our staff numbers, so I can get you that information if you like.
I'm just looking for, I don't think the old numbers apply, but we're saying we're going to start elementary school. Right, 9:30 is our start time for elementary school, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So if we're, if parents need to go to work, I don't know how many parents need to drop them off early because they need to go to work. And that's what we need to know, isn't it?
We would need to know that. Before school was not offered prior to this request being made. So that definitely will have to be a survey and find out what the families would need, keeping in mind that we still would have to pay for staff to monitor those students.
But we'd also have to, I'm sorry, Mrs. Smiley, no, I was just going to say, we also would need to resurvey around after school. So we need to know both. It's just amazing how circumstances change for families. And so, again, we'd have to survey families to ascertain the need at this time.
Yeah, and I think part of their response to that survey is going to depend on whether it is free or how much it costs also, right? And so there's a little bit of a chicken or the egg here, because you'd want to know how many students in order to estimate how much would it cost the district to subsidize it. It's a little bit tricky, but I think maybe we could, if this is coming before the board to talk about more, and if there is if there are choices, options on that continuum of how much or whether we subsidize it, understanding the potential scale of that cost to the district to subsidize it, I think would be helpful. So even if we don't know the real numbers, if we could say, well, if we just opened on this model, this is how much it would cost to make it free for this number of students. If it turns out a third of our students need before school care, this is how much it would cost. Just understanding the potential range of that cost if we were to do something like subsidize it or offer it for free. And we have 4 minutes left. I do want to briefly just discuss this last topic, or at least tee it up. Is there anything else from the committee or from the team?
So thank you so much, Mrs. Smiley. I do have one item, and that is before the meeting ends, if we could just have clarity regarding what, if anything, from this meeting needs to be on the agenda for Monday.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay. So very briefly, Rhonda, maybe I'll tee this one up. The board said we would do or begin this year. We'll see how far we get, an equity audit of the budget. So meaning in our equity policy, in the definition of equity includes negotiating and reallocating and sometimes reimagining resources, opportunities, and supports when equal distribution of these things results in inequitable outcomes. And it also says we will take active measures to equitably allocate resources to accomplish these goals, a set of goals. And so what the sort of overarching idea here is that we would take a look at how the district allocates resources with an equity lens, meaning are we distributing equitably versus equally. And so what we wanted to talk about, but we do not have time for, are two things that I'm hoping you all can either send me your thoughts over email, or I'm happy to get on a phone call and talk live about it. One is what should be the objectives, the outcomes, outputs of this equity audit? And two is how should we do it? So should we, the board take it on? Should Rhonda take it on? Should we identify someone external who is an expert in this, which maybe showing my cards is what I think maybe we should do. So that was the purpose of this discussion. Yes, Bonnie.
I have two things. First of all, I don't think there's anything out of Dr. Felder's question. I don't think there's anything out of this meeting that needs to go to the board at this time, not for Monday for sure. Right now, on the equity audit, to me, it's pretty straightforward to start with. And I don't know if you want to extend the meeting by 5 minutes, but to just pretty straightforwardly do a budget by school, pulling the Title I funds out, but just looking at our per pupil spending by school for the number of students in the school. Because I do know we have inequities because of teacher because we have more senior teachers in some of our schools. And I think just a first cut that way to take a look at our funding by school, by pupil, by school, and just see how, and then, I think there's the second level, and that's the resource allocations. I think they call them the allotments. Do we allot, are we allotting equitably? But I think those are, from a budget perspective, those are the two things, the spending and allotments.
Yep. Do we have a motion to just extend by 5 minutes? I don't want to keep staff longer than that, but if staff can stay for 5 minutes.
I don't think we have to vote on that. We don't have a policy
No.
on how long these last, so I don't think it has to be.
No. Okay. All right. Let's go 5 more minutes if that is all right with. Yes, I'm seeing Ms. Rath nodding. Okay. Okay. So I do think that this is a bit more of a discussion, Ms. Hauser. What I'm wondering is, if each of you could send me these thoughts and suggestions, and I can see if they are, generally aligned, if it will require more conversation. I don't have in front of me the date of our next budget meeting, and I can talk to Ms. Rath about timeline of this and how quickly we want to get it going. But let's start with that. Maybe what do you imagine this would include, and how do you think we would go about it? And then I can compile those for us.
Yeah, and that's so as part of, I'll do that. And because the other thing is to make sure our Title I funds are actually being separated and given to our Title I schools.
Yep.
But to me, there's a more strategic issue. It's not really an audit issue. I'm fascinated by Wake County's elementary school model, where they are giving their teachers more additional supplements and providing additional resources to their Title I schools, and it's working.
Yeah.
And so I'm just curious, because that's the other part of it, is how does investment tie to outcomes? But I don't know if we want to do anything. But that's not an audit question. That's really a strategic question.
Right. Well, and the term audit maybe is the wrong term to use, particularly when we're talking about finance, which I don't think is, I wouldn't imagine that being the limits of what we're doing either, but instead some recommendations for how to more equitably allocate resources and do our budgeting and things like that. So can we, Carrie, Bonnie, are you both all right sending me your thoughts on these questions?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. And then Ms. Rath, Dr. Felder, I will follow up with both of you about timing and what the next steps should be, whether we need more discussion. And then back around to the topic of whether any of this needs to be on, especially the agenda for Monday. Are there any approvals you need from the board? Are there in terms of the timeline, maybe of the Supervised Learning Lab and the before and after school? Are there things you need in a time-sensitive way from the board?
So I will need to circle back to staff, but if there are, am I hearing it's okay to bring those things forward, or would?
I think that's a good idea.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Others' thoughts on that?
I just don't, I hear that we're missing key pieces of information in order to bring it to the board. And I think we have enough things to deal with, but.
Well, we do. But I also know that, there could be, and again, I would just need to revisit this with staff to determine if there are any items that were addressed today that need more information. The only opportunity we'd have would be to bring that additional information to the board so that a decision could be made, or hopefully so we can move the work forward. I just don't want any cogs in the wheel. And so I'll circle back to the team and see if any of those items need to be brought to the board with the additional information. Yeah.
Great. Well, I think this was a good opportunity to spend more time on Supervised Learning Labs and get a bit deeper than our board meetings have been so full. So appreciate that opportunity to talk about that with you all. Anything else?
No, I just want to say thank you to Rhonda Raff. Great job, Rhonda. We appreciate you.
Thank you for just helpful and light. So thank you very much.
Well, this has got to be like the most complicated budgeting financial year ever with the number of moving pieces, new initiatives, different streams of funding. Like, I know it's very, very complex. So just appreciate all of that.
It's interesting for sure.
Keeping it moving.
Thank you, Ms. Rack and
Appreciate you all.
everybody.
Thank you,
All right.
everyone.
Anyone want a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second that.
Wonderful. All right. Enjoy the rest of your week, you all. Bye.